We have a new person to talk to you. It's not a person, it's a new man, I should say. Person is not a word we should be using in this day and age. A person is a thing, and this isn't a thing, this is a man. Dave Morgan, I've only met you fairly recently, although we don't live terribly far apart, but you've got a very interesting life story, really, and you've come out of what we call the system. So I'd like you to tell the viewers what has made you come out of the system, or are you fighting the system, or are you out of the system for your own reason? All sorts of things have happened along life's rich pattern. So let's have a chat. So give us a little resume, a little bit of your life and where we're going.
Okay, thanks, Liz. It's nice to see you again, and thanks for inviting me on. Yeah, my name's Dave Morgan. I'm 50 something, and I'm not prepared to admit to the rest. Um, I suppose I started to sort of come away from the system. I'll say straight away, I'm not living completely off grid. I'm very much finding my way. I lived down in West Wales for many years. I grew up in Kent, and recently I've come back. And what I'd say is I'm just an everyday guy who's looked at the system. I understand how it works. I understand why it works the way it does. And I'm gradually, I would say, taking my authority back. I realise that what the system wants from us, and it's not acceptable to me. So I'm finding my way. As I say, I don't live off grid. I'm not an expert in all of that, but I've done tons and tons of work to try and step away and put my attention elsewhere, is probably how I describe myself at the moment.
What has motivated you to do this, though, Dave? Because most people go from 9 to 5 or eight or shift work or what have you, doing a particular job. What's motivated you to come out?
I think I mean, just to backtrack just a little. I mean, I've read very widely for many years, and when I read books by people like John Pilger, and then the Committee of 300, and then Transformation of America, I realised that there was something very wrong. I had a healthy suspicion for it, so that was my first reason. There was something wrong, and I suppose I asked myself eventually, what was behind this? It seemed very strange to me, Liz, that human beings would contribute to damaging their own planet, the planet they walk on. They would harm each other. This made no sense to me. They would harm animals, nature, and so forth. So I asked myself some hard questions. I said, well, what's behind it? How does it work, and what does it want? What ultimately is this about? And then I picked up a series of texts. They were written between 1995 and about 2013, something like that. And it explained, the answers to those questions that I'd had. And I realized that what this was about was the capture of human consciousness. It's about control, but it's not what generally people call mind control. For me, what I realized when I read it is the capture of human consciousness is a really prized possession. Not only does it give energy, but it also gives control of events on this planet. So I studied it for quite a long time, and it kind of foretold what's happening now. And it's quite strange. Way back then, when I was reading this, was about 2010 onwards, I started to study this. Um, it was explaining what was going to happen and why. So when it started to roll out, suddenly it became very graphic to me. It was hard to picture it back then, 10, 15 years ago. But seeing it unroll now, and what we're now seeing in world events, I realised that what it said was absolutely correct. And I think that's what made me. I've been doing it for a number of years, but that's what made me say my consciousness was equally captured in that system. I was part of that system. I was working in that system. So I kind of started to step away in terms of how much energy do I give it. So that was kind of what made me realise then that when this was rolled out, that it'd been pre-planned for a long time. And I think the fundamental thing, Liz, you asked me, what motivated me to step away. Systems need compliance, and they're very clever. So they capture your consciousness by getting. We all know about the Hegelian dialect. They tell you there's a problem, then they tell you we'll keep you safe, and then they say to you, if you do what we tell you, then you'll be safe, and therefore they get what they want. But there's more going on beneath the surface in something like that. And the point is, my own, my own kind of beliefs, I suppose. I don't like the word spiritual, but my own beliefs. We're unique beings. Each one of us has our own unique frequency, our own unique note, and we will never be happy unless we express who and what we are. And it comes from in here. It doesn't come from following a system. It doesn't come from following the will of something else. We find happiness inside when we're being us, not when we're complying. So I guess I realized there was a fundamental conflict here, which is compliance and making sure you're unhappy, because you can't. How can you be happy if you're not being yourself? You're never going to be happy if you're following what someone else tells you to be. But there's something very insidious that actually happens when you give your authority, your will, to something else that promises to keep you safe. I've realized in more recent years, you abandon yourself. You abandon that inner part of you. And it's very difficult to find it again. So this system, it's more insidious than is commonly recognized. It takes something from you, which is your inner resource, which is your inner connection with all that is. It takes that from you and gets you to comply. And it puts you in this, you notice that narrative and narrow sound quite similar. It puts you in this narrow band of frequencies that you have to exist, or you won't be safe. And I can't do that. I can't live like that. I can't exist in that state, following the will of another. And that would guarantee me being unhappy, and I would abandon something much more precious and fragile than me. Can't do it. Won't do it. And that's what I suppose drove me to go out and say, well, who am I? What am I? How do I survive in the world? And I'm still part of that system, because you don't go from being in it from the time you're tiny to changing it. You have to find your way step by step.
I think probably I've always been outside, really, because when we started this television channel, and I'm not sure whether people actually understand this, but I'll tell you so other people understand, we were the naughty step TV, because all my life, not to be difficult, Dave, but I've always stood outside a little bit. Now, as you say, we're all unique. So if I've seen something that I don't think is right or what have you, it didn't matter whether it's at school or wherever it was, I would always stand for what I thought. So I've always, therefore, been on the naughty step. But when we started this as the Naughty Step TV, naughty has got several different connotations, and people were tuning into our channel thinking it was for something totally different than what we were standing for. And I don't need to go any further, but yes, you might well are. So I know there were some serious people that wouldn't come on because of what they thought we were. So we had to change to Freedom Digital Broadcasting, but we did start life as the Naughty Step. So I totally agree with you. The only way you're happy is when you're happy inside yourself. And when you know that people are telling you to do things that aren't right, then how can you possibly be happy? So you've come away now from being controlled by either working and whatever. So where do you see the future going, Dave? What do you see yourself doing, and how you, if you like, project the happiness within you to other people? Because that's really what we're here to do as well.
Yeah, I'd say, and you kind of just touched on it there. I mean, I'd say this is a journey, and each have to find our own steps. Like I can't prescribe it, I can't even prescribe it for myself, so I'm certainly not trying to prescribe it for someone else. This is a personal thing that we all undertake, and I think we all have to leave the system behind gradually. I personally, I'm not particularly fighting it. I don't see the point in that. I'm putting my energy slowly into discovering what my life is, what was it meant to be, because from the time I was tiny, I was indoctrinated into it like everybody else. So it's difficult to know the future. All I can tell you is that I think when we realize this, we ask ourselves the fundamental question, and we say, where's my authority? Is my authority out there, or do I take it back? I've given it away all of my life, and I think for me, my future lies with living from within, living from my own authority, and following what life brings to me. I think there's an old saying, isn't there? Whatever you give your attention on grows. All the time I'm giving my attention to the system, be it to comply or be it to fight or be it to do anything relating to the system, I'm giving it my energy. And it's quite interesting that, I personally, I see it as like a stage, a huge, great play, if you like. And it's broadcast in through all of our devices, our television, our media, and we all get involved and we all get wrapped up in it. And yet if we all just, stood up and exited that theatre, turn our TVs off, turn our devices off, and we all walked out and just went and got on with our lives, our futures would evolve from inside us. No one can tell us what our future is because it's locked inside of us. There's a very wise lady a few years ago who said to me, there's problems ahead, and if anyone or anything tries to tell you they know the future, you can discard that as a reliable piece of information, because your future lies within you. And I've never forgotten that, Liz. That's an interesting concept. So I would say I'm finding me. I'm discovering who I am and what works for me, and hence why I've started to, take my consciousness and my energy out and come back home and discover what's important for me and what's right for me, not what's right for that system.
Good. Now, you have been doing some work. The way I met you, Dave, a few weeks ago was when we were both listening to two very informed men talking about 5G, electromagnetic fields, radiation, etc. Now, I know from what you're saying is you talk a lot about frequencies, etc. So tell us a little bit about your work that you've been doing in that field, if you can.
Yeah, do you want to talk about the sort of general things I've been doing this, or do you want to just talk about the electromagnetic stuff?
No. You can talk about the general things, but do talk about people find EMF. If you go out and talk to people locally, people that you know, they look at you as if almost as if you've grown two horns in a tail when you talk about EMF or radiation, etc. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about that. No, but talk generally, but also talk a little bit about that as well, because people don't understand that.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess my journey sort of out of the system, when I realised that we couldn't trust it anymore. All the things that we took for granted, those authorities have long been captured, and they're not trustworthy. So even basics like our water, I've got a water distiller, and I look at what's in my water distiller every morning, and you wouldn't want to drink that. So I guess when I realised that not only is our water being poisoned, our air's being poisoned, the food is they're now licensed to grow GMO foods in the UK and so forth. I started to realise that I had to learn some, really go back to learning basic skills. So I've got a bit of a list of skills here, Liz, which I'll just kind of run through. So as I said, things like basics like water. I've got a distiller. I've also got a water filter. I learned how to use a life straw, and I found out where the local springs were. Not because I'm trying to be a doomsday sayer or anything else. It was more about where does water even come from? How do I give my body pure natural water? Because I'm trying to stay as healthy as I can. I'm trying to stay out the necessity to turn to others for my health unless I have to. So I'm trying to clean my body really. With food, I just did simple things. I've only got a small little plot, but I went down to my local garden centre, told them what I wanted to do, and they said, "There you go. You can have there's as many pallets out there as you can eat." So I got all the pallets home, and I made things like raised beds out of pallets using a crowbar, hammer, nails. Nothing complicated. None of this was expensive. It wasn't anything that anybody else couldn't do. It's simple stuff.
That's where the pallets went.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. And then you can burn what's left. I've got a log burner, so you burn what's left. They're only going to ditch them. So this was about hand skills, and I pull a heap of carrots out my garden every night. And Liz, I've noticed something really strange. they taste like carrots. It's incredible. I looked at things like simple things like transport. You know, I mean, we're all aware of what the Agenda 2030 and climate change agenda is all about. So I got a bike. You know, I explored all the local countryside. I've got panniers. Can I go and get my own shopping and just be a bit independent? What happens if there's difficulties getting fuel and stuff like that? So it's practical things, but also it was great. I go out miles now and go and see nature. How many times I go past and there's a telegraph pole with a buzzard on the top. You know, and you see this every time we go out. You know, you see nature, you see the countryside. So it's going to put me back in touch with our planet.
And also, you see what's not there, Gary. Sorry to Dave. Sorry to interrupt you for a second. But you also see what's not there that you saw perhaps 40, 50 years ago. For instance, we've got barns here, and they were always full of swallows, and I haven't seen a swallow all summer. And you start to worry. I haven't seen any insects like we used to see, or butterflies, and we grow loads of flowers and everything for butterfly. You see the odd one or two. We used to be absolutely covered. So where have all these insects and things gone? So sorry to interrupt, Dave. Carry on.
No, and do anything that we're talking about. Is do throw it in, because this is a bit of a journey, and as you say, you spot things as you come away from the system that your attention has been on all day long, sitting tapping keys on a keyboard or whatever we used to do. You start to notice things you never noticed before. So as I say, I mean, I've been out a lot in nature and just actually looking at our planet again and seeing what's really good and discovering some of the things that are maybe, as you say, starting to lack. I looked at power. And I know there's power cuts in lots of countries, so I got a generator. I learned how to service a generator. Again, just basic hand skills, but just that slight feeling of independence. I looked at walkie-talkies for alternative communications. I studied health a lot. I've looked at natural alternative health options. I found a brilliant herbalist over in Biddenden. She's absolutely fabulous. I'm grateful to her. She's helped me an awful lot. Studied a bit about the law, common law. Did David Edelman's course on the People's Lawyer. Learned so much from him. And I'm also studying things like bushcraft, just basic survival skills, and things like I'm looking at self-defense. So I'm just going to touch now on the EMF, and I'm going to go about it from a different direction. It's one of the things I looked at quite a lot. And this glass of water here is loaded with electrolytes, so on my journey, back to health from a serious problem a few years ago, I learnt about the importance of electrolytes. And there's a brilliant YouTube video by Dr. Berg. I'd encourage everyone to have a look at it. It's only a couple of minutes. And what he does, he gets some distilled water, and I personally, I do distill my water, but he gets some distilled water, and then he connects it to a little electrical circuit and puts a bulb on it. But there's no power, nothing, because the electricity can't conduct through the water. Now, our interstitial fluid basically is water surrounding our cells. That's how the nutrients reach the cells. Then he put in a teaspoon of electrolytes, and the power came on. And he said, that's how important electrolytes are to your body. And I started to look at that. And of course, then what I realized was that, well, hang on a minute. If we were an electrical device and you've got power running through an electrical device, what does it have around it? It has an electromagnetic field. So it's called our auric field. So when we're in low health, when we're down and low and our auric field is weakened, we are much more susceptible to some of the electromagnetic frequency weapons that are now being pointed at us. But we're also much more vulnerable to psychic attack. And there are some very dark entities out there that can penetrate your auric field. So I looked at this in detail, and a friend of mine's a really kind of powerful, clairvoyant psychic, and she said, you're right. It is so important that you do strengthen your bodies. You take electrolytes, that you strengthen your electromagnetic field. The strong auric field is the first part of your self-defense, if you like. And the reason I kind of went down this road was I had some quite painful experiences with electromagnetics. I went to have a tiny little operation on my hand, and my friend offered to take me over. We got to the car park, and there was a huge cell tower in the car park. And I was in the car. I was in the centre, just having this little tiny procedure for about an hour. We came out and we had a little walk around the town, and we was in the town a couple of hours. Didn't really think too much more about it. And I was out a few days later, and I did feel ill. I felt really, really ill. I thought it was just the anaesthetic wearing off from the operation and that, but it wasn't. A week later, fortunately, I was out with a friend, and the lady who'd taken me over, she phoned me and said she'd collapsed, and we rushed over there. And fortunately, my friend, he looked at the symptoms we were both having, and he said, "You've got radiation poison. Have you been near a cell tower?" And of course, then the penny dropped. The penny dropped. There's how dangerous they are. And it was from there really that I then started my work trying to educate people on the dangers of electromagnetics.
Right. And, I know that you've been quite successful. And where we were talking with people last week or a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about, excuse me, all these poles and masts going up, lighting, etc., which is all containing things that we really can't see and don't understand. And so you've been looking, I know, at planning, because the planners are putting these things in without I'll say without due process. I think that's a reasonable way of describing it. What would you say?
I got involved in it with Ian, one of the speakers on a couple of Sundays ago. And I was blown away by the knowledge of the group and what they were doing. And because, again, from my experience, that really woke me up. That was a real shock to me. And the thought that one of those things could be put outside my house was just horrendous. So that's why I started looking at planning applications. What's very interesting about it is I don't think the planners, I don't think they have a clue about this. I don't think most people have a clue about it. I certainly didn't until I was hit. And when I was hit with it, myself and my friend were hit with it. I then had numerous people ring me to tell me their experiences. And some of theirs were worse than mine. Some of them were really close to the edge. And so what I'm trying to do is do planning objections, and I'm trying to write to the local authorities to educate them and explain to them that when they give authority, what are they actually rolling out? But it's quite interesting. We're kind of coming full circle here because is it okay? I've got a couple of studies here. Is it okay just to read a couple of bits? Is that all right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating. This. I've read I don't know how many studies now on electromagnetics. I'm sending these off to. I've sent them off to Ofwat because they want to put smart meters on all of our water. I've sent them off to Planning Authority. No one will engage with me. No one wants to talk about it. There's no one. There are some councils that other people on the planning calls are having joy with, and we have had lots of successes in getting masts turned down. We had one turned down in the Yorkshire Dales recently.
And I think there were 3 turned down in Swindon fairly recently as well, out of 4, because there are a number of people across the country, all ordinary people like ourselves, Dave, who have got together and said, something's not quite right here. I've done loads and loads of research. I work with Eileen from the Radiation Research UK, Mark Steele, Ian Jarvis. We work with all these wonderful people, many of whom have just been either housewives or ordinary people, builders, etc., who realise that something's wrong. And so, like yourself, they're all now coming at it. Some councils are very receptive. Others, which we know, just say no, safe and effective. Those 3 words. We look at 3 words all the time: safe and effective.
Yeah. Did you know when thalidomide was marketed? That was marketed. I can't remember if it's safe and effective or safe. I've actually got the photograph on my iPad of the advert for thalidomide as being safe. Incredible. And it's the same narrative rolled out again and again and again, and no one seems to want to read behind the scenes and the headlines to find out what the studies say. Yeah. So
money.
Yeah. So I've been studying. I've got plenty of studies. This isn't just sort of. I just want to show you these. These are not my personal opinion. These are actual studies that I've come across, and these are just probably the two best studies. And the reason I just want to read out a couple of bits is this is what I'm sending off to my local planning authority, and I just keep getting one-page answers back saying our planning authority will, along the lines of our planning authority will take into account all necessary consideration, something like that. But I've pointed out this study here. It was published in 2015, I think it was. Yeah, published online 7th of July 2015. It's called Oxidative Mechanisms of Biological Activity of Low Intensity Radiofrequency Radiation. Radiofrequency radiation is part of the electromagnetic spectrum with frequencies from 30 kilohertz to 300 gigahertz. Okay. According to a website called Digital Trends, 5G frequencies, but also 4G frequencies are in the range 1 to 4G 1 to 5, which you'll get on your router at 2.4 and 5. 5G can be rolled out at 1 to 6 gigahertz in the mid band, and the high band is 24 gig to 47 gig. So this is definitely within this study. That's the point I'm making, because this study covers frequencies up to 300. So I'm just going to read out the abstract, and I'll sort of skip over the bits that are maybe not relevant. This review aims to cover experimental data on oxidative effects of low-intensity radiation frequency, RFR, in living cells. It looked at all living cells. The studies look at humans, look at animals, insect colonies, and so forth. Analysis of the currently available peer-reviewed scientific literature reveals new molecular effects induced by low-intensity RFR in living cells. This includes significant activation of key pathways generating reactive oxygen species, ROS, damage to DNA, and changes in the activity of antioxidant enzymes. The study indicates that among 100 currently available peer-reviewed studies, dealing with oxidative effects of low-intensity RFR in general, 93 confirm that RFR induces oxidative effects in biological systems. So just to clarify that, this review reviewed 100 studies of oxidative effects of radio frequency radiations that were below the ICNIRP limits. This is non-ionizing. So the ICNIRP is the safety body that says this is the safe level for radiation. This looked at 100 studies below those limits and found damage to living cells. So it's not just humans that are affected. This is animals, insects, and so on. And it found that there was damage caused in 93 of them. That's pretty convincing from my perspective. All right, but what damage? So a wide pathogenic potential of the induced ROS and their involvement in cell signaling pathways explains a range of biological health effects of low-intensity RFR, which include both cancer and non-cancer pathologies. In conclusion, our analysis demonstrates that low-intensity RFR, so below the ICNIRP limits, is an expressive oxidative agent for living cells with a high pathogenic potential, and that the oxidative stress induced by RFR should be recognized as one of the primary mechanisms of the biological activity of this kind of radiation. So that's pretty damning. I mean, this study is a fabulous study. It took me probably the best part of a day to read and reread and tie it up. It shows, for example, it says at the beginning that the level of indoor background radio frequency radiations in industrialized countries increased 5,000-fold from 1985 to 2005. So our bodies are quite delicate electrochemical beings. We've got these tiny, tiny little electrical pulses that power us, as we saw from the electrolyte experiment. And we're bombarding ourselves with these frequencies, and we expect it to have no effect. The rate of increase is a 5,000 rate increase. And at the back of the study, I haven't marked it, but at the back of the study, they then go on to explain about over that same period of time, the changes in health and how some countries are now recognizing electrohypersensitivity as a disease. And that's just one study. Do you want to comment on that? I'd just like to read you something from the second study as well.
Yes, no, that's fine. What I'd like you to do is send over the studies to me so that I can, if you can email them to me, so that I can put up the links and what have you, so people can read. I mean, this is going out worldwide, so this is not just here, Dave. This goes out worldwide, so that everybody has a chance. And we do know that the ICNIRP, and I'm sure you'll talk about this, ICNIRP doesn't confirm that there's no damage in any of the ranges. That it doesn't say. It says, you know, this is the sort of best you can hope for sort of thing, almost, doesn't it? There's no certificate at all, really, when you look at it.
But they self-certify, Liz. That's the point. And there's, I mean, I don't want to go down too deep down the ICNIRP rabbit hole because it's huge. It's absolutely huge. But yeah, that's one study, and you know they show in there how over 20 years, 30 years, you know, health has deteriorated, and they bring out the explanation. We're electrochemical beings. We're these, you know, we're delicate, and we're now sitting in this sea of electromagnetic smog, and we're being told it's safe and effective. Really? And the second study that I've been sending off, just to try and raise the awareness. You know, I mean, I didn't know. I can't criticize the authorities and a lot of the people that are in positions and maybe have held those positions for a long time. And this new technology is being rolled out, and they might not necessarily be able to sort of lift the covers on this and see what we're now seeing, those of us that are looking at this more deeply. So I'm not knocking them. I'm just trying to share this information so they understand. And it was only really from personal experience that I realized how damaging these frequencies can be. But this is a really good study as well. This is called Scientific Evidence Invalidates Health Assumptions Underlying the FCC and ICNIRP Exposure Limit Determinations for Radiofrequency Radiation, Implications for 5G. And this is, again, another long study. It takes quite a read, but I'm just going to read out a little bit of the abstract. In the late 1990s, the FCC and ICNIRP adopted radiofrequency radiation RFR exposure limits to protect the public and workers from adverse effects of RFR. Now, get this bit, Liz. These limits were based on results from behavioral studies conducted in the 1980s, including 40 to 60-minute exposures in 5 monkeys and 8 rats, and then applying arbitrary safety factors to an apparent threshold specific absorption rate of 4 watts per kilogram. These limits were also based on 2 major assumptions. Any biological effects were due to excessive tissue heating, and no effects would occur below the putative threshold SAR, specific absorption rate, as well as 12 assumptions that were not specified by either the FCC or ICNIRP. And this study goes through and destroys every single one of those assumptions. So I sent this off to Ofwat, and I said, you're rolling out smart meters across the entire country based on a safety standard tested on 5 monkeys and 8 rats. Do you think that's a good idea? I sent that letter 5 weeks ago. Haven't received an answer yet. It's jaw-dropping when you look into it.
Most people won't have. We've got an only recently acquired an EMF meter, so that you can meter, and that's quite frightening. Not far from us, there are a load of pylons, and we drove past. And when you go under them, the meter goes off the Richter scale. And when you look along the line of those pylons, you see houses actually underneath the wires, and you think, this is what they're being exposed to all the time. It is absolutely, you know, the things we didn't understand, Dave, that I still don't understand. I was never very good at physics. Chemistry I was good at, and biology, but physics is a no-no, unfortunately. You're just drinking water now. I'd never heard of structured water. I'd heard of distilled water. But then when you look at these things under the microscope, and then you see what can happen when they're crystallized and frozen, etc., it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable what we don't know and what we are not taught, not
Yeah.
what we are taught.
What's astonishing is, I mean, I said a few minutes ago that we kind of come full circle, and what I meant by that is, I said right at the beginning that the goal of this is to capture human consciousness, because then you can control it, and then you can direct it to whatever means you want it directed to. So when you look at how powerful that is, it's really quite astonishing, and there's probably not many better examples that you can control people and you can capture people to such a point that even when they read studies like these, they will continue to roll out technology and approve technology that harms them, their children, their grandchildren, the local community, friends, family, the planet that we walk on every day, that we're utterly dependent upon for our sustenance. To see consciousness captured to such a point that it will carry on rolling out the dictates of that system, even if it means the destruction of possibly themselves and lots of life of this gorgeous planet that we live on. To me, then I got what those texts were telling me all those years ago.
You're quite right. I was fortunate enough to interview Dr. Matthias Desmet on mass formation psychosis. I hope, yeah, absolutely. And I was, he's so informative. He's such a lovely man, but so informative. I mean, we don't live far from each other, as I've said, and we have wonderful forests near us. And my husband and a friend were driving back through the other day. A woman got out of her car and put a mask on. And she went on her own with got two dogs out of the car, but put a mask on. I mean, I just, yes, there's not much you can say, really, is there? And I couldn't understand. I've never worn a mask from day one. Dave, my husband, and I were quite well aware of the evil that was being put on around us. So we've never ever conformed to any of this. People say, "What a dreadful year when we were all locked down." We were never locked down. We just did everything normally. The only time we realised things were different was when you actually went to go shopping or something, and you could see it all around you. But we just did everything exactly the same as we've always done, because I couldn't understand. If you look out of there today and you breathe the air, what was the difference between yesterday and tomorrow? We're supposed to have all these dreadful things when they do the pictures of the COVID virus, as they call it, and what have you. COVID, certificate of vaccine identification. Nobody seemed to realise. And what destroys me is the fact that I think I was well educated. I went to grammar school, and that doesn't take it away from people who went to secondary modern. I'm just saying I thought I was quite well educated. What happened to all my friends who were taught to read at the same time as I was, that cannot read Agenda 2030 or 2050 or any of the things that are being thrown into the World Economic Forum? It's all written down. The EMF, the IGNA regulations, I can read it just as well as anybody else can, and so you can't understand what has happened to people's brains over the years that they can't see what's in plain sight.
It might come to self-confidence, Liz, because I think there's a number of factors, but one of my observations is it might come down to self-confidence. If you are raised within a system and you grow up and you work in that system, and it's that system that tells you it's going to keep you safe and effective, and that's drummed into you every minute of every day. I mean, do you know, I went to get on a bus a couple of months back, and the window was locked open, and underneath was a sign saying the windows are locked open on this bus to keep you safe. Really, you think I need to know about how to breathe to keep me safe and getting fresh air? But this is what's drummed into us now. The more you sit inside that system, and the more you sit, looking at tapping keys on a keyboard, the less you are in touch with the day-to-day task of survival and finding your way and developing your skills and your self-confidence. Now, if you believe that you need something, you need an external authority to stay safe, it's very, very difficult to break away from that system.
I suppose you're right. It baffles me entirely. But then, as you so rightly said at the beginning, we are all totally individual, working in our own frequency, if you like. But it does, when you grow up, as you said, we all grow up in a system somewhere. We all had a class of, say, 30 people, but we were all taught. We were taught not what to think, but how to think. This has changed over the last 50 years. But when you're taught how to think, it seems to have bypassed many of my friends. And you're right, because one of my friends worked all her life in the NHS. And when I begged her not to take a jab, she said, why would the NHS do something that would kill me or injure me? Because that is how she has worked, because she genuinely believed, and I'm sure she was right at the time, did everything to preserve life, and couldn't see that there'd be something come down the line that would do anything else except that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's what I find quite the more I've kind of woken up, I suppose, the more I've stepped away, the more I've started to think for myself and work things out. Just when years and years ago, I had a small holding, and every day you've got a new problem to solve, and it gets your mind active. And I've kind of come back to that a little bit, where I've learned to do lots of practical things, as I just described. I think the more you do that, the more you see, the more you realize. And when you then step away and you started to take some steps away from that system and you look at it, if we're all individual beings and we find our happiness, we find our peace through our creativity, through expressing ourselves and being accepted just by being us, there's something fundamental with a system that wants utter compliance and seeks to crush that. It's a choice that I think each of us make. Do we accept someone else's authority and abandon our inner selves? Or do we come back home and say, no, I'm the authority in my life. I am. And I can make choices that are right for me. When you look at it like that, there's something very, very insidious and malevolent about that system.
Absolutely. And if you look now, the reason I'm so hopeful, Dave, is when you look at the number of people that weren't jabbed. If you look at all the injuries now to those poor people that were, and I can quite understand why they were, many for very, very good reasons. Many, of course, now not with us because they've taken this dreadful medication, if you would like to call it that. But when you look at the people that didn't, I am very hopeful that the human race actually, especially if you like here in Britain, that we understand there's so many million that didn't take, that do understand. So for that, there is a great building block, if you like, of humanity that understands that there are malevolent forces out there, and it's far more than people would have you believe. So I'm very hopeful that humanity will take all this on board and defeat the evil ones that are doing all this to us.
Yeah, and I think I think probably just my closing comment is would be, obviously I'm involved and I see communities of people all trying to figure out, what to do next and where to, where do they look, because we all used to look to the system and we're all trying to find our way. And the point I'm trying to get across today is this is just my journey. I'm not trying to preach to anybody else, do what I do. Quite the opposite. What I'm saying is discover who you are and work with those other people in your communities, but work with them. Don't necessarily all try to agree to do the same thing, because there's a real danger then that all we do is create another system where we're all trying to fit in and agree with each other, and therefore again we're abandoning how we want to live. My take on it is each of us have to discover what's inside of us. We have to express that, and then we will find our own happiness. We'll find our own peace, because we've accepted us. We're the authority in our lives, and we're following our path. And then from that basis, my take is that we can then work with others. But It's about finding us, not each of us finding that unique frequency within us, not following somebody else.
That's I couldn't agree with you more. But the more that you smile and you find inner peace, the more you find other people gravitate towards you looking for their own. That's the way I look at it. And so, Dave, I can't thank you enough for coming on today. I hope, say, in about 3 or 4 months' time, we can do another interview to see how we're all progressing. How does that sound?
Be a pleasure, Liz. Absolute pleasure.
What would actually happen if you ran out of electrolytes? Now, if you ran out completely, you would die. But if you ran out just a little bit, all sorts of things would happen. But the main big thing that'll happen is you'll lose electrical power of your nerves, your muscles, and your cells. I have a really short little demo to tell you exactly what I mean. All right, we're going to do an experiment, a demonstration. We have a light source. We have a power source. It's plugged into the wall over here. You can see the cords. And we have an incomplete circuit, okay, electrical circuit. We cut the wire and we put the wire into distilled water. Distilled water is water without minerals and without electrolytes. Electrolytes are electrically charged minerals, okay? So we have no conductivity here. You can see there's no light. So we're going to take some electrolytes here. Take a scoop of electrolytes and we'll pour it in to this distilled water. And let's see what happens. And now we're going to mix it with the water to make sure it's dissolving. And look what's happening. We have a complete circuit now. So one of the main purposes of electrolytes in the body is to power the nervous system, which is the electrical system of the body, which powers the muscles and all the different organs. All right, so now that you know generally what electrolytes are, let's talk about how you would create a deficiency. Well, one way is when you start doing fasting, especially if you do prolonged fasting and you only drink water without electrolytes. You see, our bodies don't store electrolytes for a long period of time. I'm talking about potassium, magnesium, sodium, chlorides, or calcium, okay? They don't store these minerals. So if you're drinking water, first of all, you're diluting these minerals when you're fasting, and then you're not eating, you're gonna run out of electrolytes. And a lot of people are already running on a low tank of electrolytes. And so when they start fasting, they might not feel good. They might feel dizzy. They get fatigue, keto flu, other symptoms, and they might even pass out. Very important to take electrolytes when you do fasting. All right, number two, if you start the ketogenic diet, you may run out of electrolytes. Why? Because you're switching to ketones or fat fuel. You're no longer running on glucose. And what happens is your body dumps a lot of these stored glucose. So stored glucose as glycogen is just a bunch of glucose molecules strung together with a lot of water. Because for every 1 gram of glucose that's stored, you have 3 grams of water. So glycogen is a fluid-filled sugary substance that's stored in your liver and stored in your muscles. It's not stored in the brain. It's in the liver and the muscles and other organs as well. So what happens when you stop eating sugar is you start dumping all this glycogen as well as fluid. An average person could lose like 13 pounds of extra fluid. And with the fluid comes electrolytes. So you're going to lose a lot of electrolytes, like even potassium. So this is why I recommend electrolytes with keto and fasting. But on the flip side, when you consume a high carb diet, especially if there's sugar and refined carbs involved in that high carb diet, you also become deficient in electrolytes, because to store that sugar as glycogen, you also need potassium. So when you lose glycogen, when you do keto, you lose potassium. And then when you consume a lot of the high carbohydrates, you'll lose potassium because it's locked up and stored in the glycogen, which is not always readily available to you. Quick story. My wife and I, when we got married like 31 years ago, we went to this Italian restaurant and we had massive amounts of pasta, pizza, bread, desserts, wine, more desserts, more bread, more pasta. So we're driving home and I'm not feeling too good, okay? I try to go to bed and my pulse rate is just like bam, 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 just like way, way too high. I didn't know back then what it was, but reflecting back, it was a major potassium deficiency, because to store all that sugar, my body was sucking potassium out of the blood and pushing into that glycogen. And so the pulse rate went up. And that's why number 4, increased pulse rate when you run out of electrolytes. Now, also when you sweat, vomit, have diarrhea, if you're on diuretics, other medications, all of these can create an electrolyte deficiency. All right, the next question is, what symptoms occur when you start running out of electrolytes? Arrhythmias. Why? Because electrolytes power muscle, not just your muscles like the skeletal muscles, but your cardiac muscles. And so you may not initially just feel arrhythmias, you might just feel like a heart palpitation. That could be an electrolyte deficiency. All right, number 2, fatigue. Why? Because electrolytes power the body. They give the body energy. And the 2 minerals, sodium, potassium, work as a major pump to generate a tremendous amount of energy in all the cells to make everything work. And without those 2 electrolytes, things are going to be very, very low electrically. Thus the term keto fatigue when you start keto, because a lot of people don't do electrolytes, or you might experience muscle weakness. That's usually a sodium deficiency. A person's not consuming enough salt. Okay, 3, dizziness and dehydration. You just don't have the fluid to run the body. And if we don't have that, we get dizzy because we're dehydrated. All right, number 4, I already talked about that. 5, muscle twitches, spasm, and cramps. So many people, when they're sleeping, get these cramps and they don't know what it is. It's an electrolyte problem. All right, number 6, constipation. Well, your colon is smooth muscle. So again, it's just another muscle that could be affected by electrolytes. 7, headache and brain swelling. Now, this relates to a sodium deficiency many times. It could relate to other things. But let's say, for example, you decided to exercise and drink a lot of water and sweat and not put the electrolytes back in, and you kept drinking more and more water. You can end up with a severe sodium deficiency that's called hyponatremia, where the brain actually starts swelling. So it's important that we're not hydrated just with water. We're hydrated with electrolytes and water. Number 8, you can go into shock. Number 9, feel nauseated, get the keto flu. 10, a loss of blood clotting factors, and that's specifically calcium. So you can see there's a lot of things that can happen when you run out of electrolytes. Probably the most important electrolyte is potassium, because you need it in such large amounts. If you haven't seen my video on potassium, I put it up right here. Check it out.